Shabbat Shalom. My colleague, Rabbi Michael Bernstein, I think said it very well. The devastating images are impossible to hold on to, and even more impossible to let go of. On Wednesday morning, a shooter armed with multiple weapons stood outside Annunciation Catholic Church in Minneapolis, where Mass was taking place, the opening Mass of the Catholic school next door. The perpetrator blocked the doors, shot through the stained glass windows, killing 2 children, wounding at least 17 other people, and then ultimately died of a self-inflicted gunshot. The stories are harrowing. Teachers shielding students with their bodies. The sights that the first responders saw when they eventually were able to come in. As I look around the room, I know there are possibly some parents who are saying, why do you have to discuss this? There are children in the room. But I'm actually going to ask the children in the room, how many of you have had to do a drill where you had to hide in your classroom or seek shelter in case someone came in to do something bad? Show of hands. So if you are over a certain age, you would duck under your desk because the Ruskies were going to get you. If you are under a certain age, you have to be prepared for a risk that is far more real. And so now, of course, the posturing and hand-wringing begins. There are a lot of thoughts and prayers, and people coming up with many theories of what may have killed those children other than guns. So one pundit said on TV, if we have the desire to stop school shootings, the first thing you should do is that every school in the country should have a metal detector. I don't know how metal detectors protect you when the shooter is outside the building. So more prayers than thoughts there. And if you look at darker corners of the world, there are some who are making a fuss about the fact that the shooter had at least for a time identified as transgender. And so pursuing this agenda of demonizing people who are trying to figure out who they really are. Other people say it's antidepressants. I promise you that many more people are killed by bullets than by bupropion. There is actually an answer beyond guns, and it's actually a very simple one. There is a nihilistic, violent extremist movement out there. These are people who online, who are radicalized, and who find people who are vulnerable and turn them. And in fact, when you look at the videos that the shooter made, you look at what he wrote on his weapons. He wrote the names of mass murderers who had come before, and of course he included anti-Semitic screeds. 6 million was not enough. Burn Israel. Israel must fall, and destroy Hayas. Meanwhile, there are right-wing bots on X that says, oh, of course the shooter was Jewish. Everyone is using this agenda, is using this shooting for an agenda. What do we make of it? Our Torah portion describes an unusual ritual. If it happens, the Torah says that in the land that God is assigning to possess, someone is found slain, lying in the open, and no one knows who killed them. You measure the distance to the closest town. The elders of that town come out and they take a heifer that has never been worked. You take it next to a stream, you kill it, and then the leaders of the town make a declaration. Anu ve'amru yadenu lo shafchu et hadam hazeh ve'nenu lo ra'u. The leaders of the nearest town must say, our hands did not shed this blood, nor did our eyes see it done. And that is exactly what is happening. Our leaders are saying, it wasn't us, it was the antidepressants. It wasn't us, it was the LGBTQ, right? Everyone, it's someone, it's not me. When you look back at the Torah ritual, it's kind of odd. Do we really think that the leaders of this town were the ones who killed this person. It makes a good plot for Law and Order, right? But that's clearly, we're not thinking that the judges the next town over, the ones who did this. Well, when you say my hands did not shed this blood, when I teach kids and there is some episode of mischievousness and trouble happens, I generally know that the first kid to jump up and say, like Shaggy, "It wasn't me," that's probably the first kid whose story is not going to check out. All the teachers are like, "Yep." And so what do we make of the fact that in ancient times and today, the leaders get up and say, "It was not our hands that shed this blood"? And the Talmud says, would you actually think that the leaders of the court are the murderers? And the answer is they are actually saying something more subtle but much more important, which is, it is not that the victim came to us looking for help and we dismissed him. It is not that he came to us for food and we left him hungry. It is not that we saw him and we left him without protection. And so you have a society of people who are saying, it's not our fault, it was somebody else. There's a fuss about thoughts and prayers. Now, I haven't done the controlled study, but if prayers actually stopped school shootings, you would expect that first and foremost, they would protect school students praying in a church. Unless you think that God only listens to your flavor of prayer and not to the Catholic ones. And I think the issue is this, and the reason why I have trouble with thoughts and prayers, I like both of those things, but if I pray to God to feed the starving, and then I never open my hand to share what I have, my prayers are empty. If I pray to God to heal the sick, and I try to stop those who are healing them, my prayers are meaningless. If I pray for God to comfort those whose loved ones were slain, and I do nothing to prevent the next murder, my prayers are a desecration. The Talmud also notes that eventually this ritual stopped. The sages taught when murderers proliferated, the ritual of the heifer whose neck is broken is nullified, because you only have this ritual happen when you are uncertain who committed the murder. But in a case where there are so many murders that it is just obvious, everyone knows what's going on, then there is no point in performing this ritual. Everyone knows who it is to blame, and it is actually everyone. At some point, just saying our hands did not spill this blood doesn't cut it anymore. And I have to admit, I had kind of given up talking about this topic. Because, by the way, just this past year in our country, there have been over 130 shootings with more than 5 people killed or injured. We as a society have actually taken mass murder as a cost of doing business. 1 year ago this week, 60 miles from here in Appalachia, a young man shot 4 students and teachers at his school. Before that, there was Columbine, Newton, Parkland, Texas, another shooting, more thoughts and prayers. And by the way, not just that, sometimes we don't even get the courtesy of thoughts and prayers. 2 weeks ago, a distressed man fired hundreds of bullets at the CDC, shot out 150 windows. Somehow, miraculously, no employees, none of the doctors and healers were killed, but he murdered a police officer, which should count for something. But the silence was deafening. People with an anti-medicine, anti-vaccine agenda, and their enablers. And I just need to say, if you are not opposed to shooting at government buildings and workers, then you are not a patriot. And by the way, that's only the latest. In Minneapolis, 2 months ago, 2 legislators were murdered in their home. And we actually know what this is about. This is actually complicated, but not so complicated. These are isolated, angry men radicalized, filled with hate online. And in fact, we know that the people who promote these kinds of attacks often prowl chat rooms and channels looking for people who are seeking help, looking for people who are in pain, looking for people who are lost. When you combine that with a society where it's far easier to get a gun than it is to get medicine, in a society where there is a normalization of violence, of hate, and by the way, hate on the left and hate on the right. And so, my friends, I think some of us are worrying about the wrong things. So the government actually has a department that is responsible for looking for domestic terrorists. And funds have been taken from that to focus on rounding up blue-collar workers who once smoked pot, girls who got a traffic violation but weren't born here, Canadians who made a mistake filling out a visa form. And meanwhile, we are not paying attention to people who are posting on YouTube that they are planning mass murder. All right. I gave an angry sermon. Some people can feel self-righteous. If you're a fan of RFK Jr., you can complain to me at Kiddush and I will think less of you. I'm going to lose 2 members over that comment, by the way. But I like to end a sermon on an uplifting note. It's Shabbat. We're celebrating a simcha. And, well, give me a minute. Look. One of the positives of our human nature, there is so much darkness in the human soul, and we see it. But there is also light. And perhaps the light is that we can get used to a lot of things. So part of the ritual of this eglah arufah, of this calf, this heifer that has its neck torn because there's a murder and everyone says it wasn't me, is that that calf cannot have been worked, and the place where that calf is killed is never to be built, never to be farmed again. That place is lost. And indeed, you see the buildings where school shootings take place. Often they will say, we're going to tear that building and build a new one because that place is no longer a place where we can be. And in fact, perhaps maybe that is a tribute to all of the young lives, all of the potential that will never be reached by those children, by those students. But there's another way of thinking about this. In Israel, they went through this terrible 12-day war, rockets, missiles raining down, and they're in the process of rebuilding Tel Aviv, Beersheba. But here's the thing, there are actually still missile alerts a few times a week. So what's funny is that more than once a week, several times a week, people are shooting a missile at us trying to kill us, but it's just the Houthis and they're not very good at it, so we will go about our lives. I'm going to go back to drinking my coffee in a minute. That we as human beings, the curse of this is that we have developed the resilience to say, it's another school shooting, we are going to go on about our lives. We have lost our ability to be enraged. But the blessing is that somehow, no matter what we face underlying it, we have the ability to face anything and continue and move forward. And so I guess what I would ask is that each of us find a little bit of our space in our heart to be thoughtful and be surprised and be sad. There is a place for guns in our society, and people who understand what guns are for and how to use them responsible actually have a special responsibility to stand up and say, we believe that we are exercising a privilege, a right, and that right comes with responsibilities that come upon our society. And people need to stand up and say, we know where people are being radicalized, we know how people are being turned against themselves and others, and we need to put the resources into helping those people if we can, and stopping those people if we can't. And I would like to hope to pray that I don't have to give this sermon again. We'll see. Shabbat Shalom.